let's go into it. So
Yeah,
I
it
think
does.
we're in historical miniature wargaming podcast version episode 3. Is that right? Is that where we're at?
I think
Yeah,
it's
I think
episode
so.
3.
So
Yeah.
we've released our initial episode. We did the firefight episode, and now we're doing the social isolation episode, I guess.
Yeah, that's
I think I
that's a
prefer a
pretty
trench
fair
position.
Entrenched positions. Okay.
Entrenched. Yeah, I like
Okay.
that.
All right, that's good. So we've got Jacob, Dan, and Gorchin here. Unfortunately, we're all on Zoom, like most of the rest of the world right now, because of COVID-19. But that's not going to stop us from playing bolt action. Unfortunately, it does stop us from meeting, but we are doing a lot of that stuff digitally at the moment, and we're still doing painting, we're still talking tactics, and we're still playing the game mostly through Tabletop Simulator, but we've got a few things up our sleeves to talk about for those who are stuck at home and really want to get some hobby in. So I might let Dan take the lead for the first topic.
Yeah, so the first thing that we thought we'd talk about is the Tabletop Simulator through Steam Workshop, as well as Solo Play, and how you can simulate an opponent. It's used a lot in chit and hex counter games, where you essentially have a programmed artificial intelligence that runs the other side of the game, and you play against that. Certain games do this really, really well. Scythe in particular jumps to mind. The automation in Scythe is ridiculously good. But you can do a similar thing with wargaming, and it's been around for years in different forms, and different games do it differently. But with bolt action, there's quite a bit you can do, but we'll get to that in a second. One of the best things, ironically, that's come out of us being quarantined is learning how to use Tabletop Simulator. And I think all 3 of us have jumped on and either played games, built maps, worked with different tables to get things, looking a bit different, played with some of the effects and the physics in there. It's been quite a good. I've certainly flipped a table several times, but
yeah,
it's a very easy platform to actually host a war game on.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think it probably takes 1 or 2 sessions to get used to the controls and get used to not accidentally flipping things around. I mean, the most apparent problem is if you in the game you're highlighting units like you would in an RTS, and you drag and drop them where you want, but that's also the same mechanic that you'd use to roll dice. So it's very easy to roll figures that you're meant to be rolling dice. But once you get past that sort of thing, the rest of it's really simple, and we're probably playing our games in the exact amount of time now that we would on the table. So on my screen, you guys won't be able to see it, but I've just brought up the Steam Store webpage, and basically this is Tabletop Simulator. It's a video game that emulates pretty much any tabletop game that you can think of. So chess, card games, war games, all that kind of stuff. And people basically make free mods based on the games that they like and all those kind of things. So it's right now it's $30 for Australians. Sometimes it goes on sale for about at 50%. But all of the additional content in here, it typically is free unless you want something that's produced by a developer. And with Tabletop Simulator specifically, I've been seeing a lot of positivity coming from the actual developers. So initially I thought it would be something where people wouldn't want to get on board because it's kind of a replacement for the systems, but really there's no other way to do that right now. But I've seen stuff come out of I think Warlord was showing off a Blood Red Skies mod the other day. I've been working on the 148 Tactic mod directly with Bowetta Wargames. Steve just put out a Fistful of Lead mod, so there's options to play a lot of different things, and I'm not seeing a backlash where people are going, "Hey, that's our property. We don't want you doing that." there is, there is a sense that you wouldn't necessarily want to, put the rule book in as a PDF and those kind of things. But most people just want to play the game, and this is the only way they can do it right now. And it's, once you play a game or two, you'll get used to importing your lists in and tables and moving terrain around, and it's I think it's really interesting. As much as I want to get back to physical wargaming ASAP, I think that I'll still utilize this post isolation as well, because there's plenty of people that we interact with on the Bolt Action Australia page on Facebook, which are people we're never going to meet in our lives, but they're people that we do talk to on pretty regularly. So I do want to get some of those games happening as well. And then we've got people all spread out through Perth who can only make it to our local club once every couple of months because they live 3 hours away. So it's a good way for us all to keep in touch. So I'm pretty happy with it. And Gorchin, you've made a pretty awesome table for the club as well.
I think the real thing about Tabletop Simulator is that it doesn't play the game for you. It doesn't let you sort of play the game. It doesn't let you play the game on autopilot. It doesn't do all of the rule checks for you. It doesn't do the measurements and the dice rolling. And I think that's where a lot of the developers and the designers of these board games aren't getting involved, is because they realize that this is a surrogate, this is a replacement, because there's a lot of things about bolt action that it can't capture, such as building and modeling your own army, doing the painting, the basing, giving your army its own sort of vibe and character and making it really yours. You can't do that in Tabletop Simulator. And as I said, the game doesn't do the rules for you. It's just quite literally a simulator of a tabletop. So that includes the dice and the terrain and the models and some of the game aids like pin markers and that sort of thing. But none of that is proprietary, and none of that, all of those things together is not sufficient to make bolt action. Bolt action is all the stuff that happens in between. And I think because of that, that's why a lot of people aren't sort of getting in the way, of they don't think the tabletop's sort of getting in the way of their product. But, and also, the flip side of that is from a cynical perspective, is if these people are shrewd businessmen, they realize that if they got upset about Tabletop Simulator, all they've done is shoot themselves in the foot from a marketing and an optics perspective. So I think unfortunately, it's in their best interest to not get involved in a negative way, and certainly not in a lawsuit or anything like that. And that's sort of touches on the main confusing point about Tabletop Simulator. There is no quote unquote DLC. There's no expansions. There's no multiple purchase points. A lot of the mods, when you look at the Browser Workshop, will say you need the original game to play. The thing that they're talking about here is the module for Crossfire, the module for Flames of War, the module for Chain of Command or Bolt Action will not teach you how to play that game. You will still need a copy of the rule book, and you'll still need some other players and all that other sorts of stuff. And so that's where that's coming from. If you've got a rule book, if you know how to play it, but you just can't physically play it nowadays, which is the reality, Tabletop Simulator is the way to go. And it's probably the best $30 I've spent on Steam in a long time, and my library is at almost 400. So I know what a good $30 on Steam looks like.
I was a little bit I was on the fence about it. I didn't know if I wanted to really commit to the digital space when I was like, I can have one person over and play a game, that'll be fine. As the restrictions got more and more, and then it went on sale, I essentially said to Ali, I'm buying this. If that's not okay, we're gonna have to talk about it. But she was very gracious, and she was like, "Yeah, it's okay." But look, I like that it simply provides, in terms of what we're talking about for bolt action, it provides the mechanics to actually get a table and two armies together. You still have to know the rules. You still have to know how far things move, how far they shoot. You've got to know all of that stuff. But it fulfills the purpose of being able to actually play the game. And one of the benefits is like what you were talking about, Gaussian, with the developers not getting in the way. I think part of the reason for that as well, that is in the developers of the game, is because there's no money in it. It's all community mod. It's like these guys are putting this stuff together because, and the tables that we built for the club, they were built because, there's no money in it for us, but we needed somewhere to play. Like just in the last 2 weeks since I've been on Tabletop Simulator with the bolt action stuff, the amount of content has almost tripled, which has been really cool.
I think we've lost.
WA,
Oh, there we go.
But
you there, Dan? We lost you for a moment.
That's my internet.
That's okay.
Next week, it's coming. I've got an.
That's
but
okay.
I just think it's really good.
Yeah. Well, another thing that I think is really beneficial about this product in particular is trialing lists, and especially if halfway in between painting something and maybe you or you've got a box of your sprues and you're not sure which weapon options you want to go for your squads and how many troops you want in and all that kind of stuff. You can trial that stuff out instantly without committing to those loadouts, and you can also go, hey, I'm really I'm in two minds. Do I want to buy British? Do I want to buy Japanese? And try those things out on Tabletop Simulator first and go, okay, Japs are the ones I want to go for, and this is the kind of list I want to do. So we've been seeing that even today, where people are like, we really want to buy into bolt action as soon as this COVID thing is over. Would you recommend Brits? Would you recommend, what was it? It was Brits and Soviets. Yeah.
Brits and Soviets.
And we're like, well, we've got those armies at the club, so you can just play them and make your decision from there. But you could just do it on Tabletop Simulator today, and then make your purchases from there based on what you like.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's it's a very timely space to really explore Tabletop Simulator, and it's come out pretty good.
Interestingly, there's been stuff like this in the past. So mostly Vassal's the popular product that's been out there for a while, but it's never really been expanded upon for bolt action. There have been a few loose mods here and there, but it was never really ideal. That's more of a top-down board game emulator than 3D models and this kind of stuff. Also, there's no automation inherent in the bolt action mod, so they're not calculating modifiers, range, and this kind of stuff. You can add that programming in if you absolutely wanted to, but it's not necessary. And I think it's a strength to it, because without that need for programming, you can physically design the tables with dragging and dropping elements that you want, and you can physically move the models and adjust your lists on the fly as you would do naturally in a physical space. So it's instant. You can go, I want to completely redesign this in a completely different makeup. And you don't need to know how to program that. You need to know how to drag and drop models and put them how it looks pretty to you, really. So I think that's a huge strength. I don't want it to necessarily include automation. You can go that far if you need to, and I think some of the Star Wars mods and some of the Warhammer mods do. But I think it's great just the way it is.
I've played a few of the 40K mods and stuff that are out there, and again, they're automating the stuff that, like, it's quality of life that you'd never be able to do in real life. Like, it's not automating modifiers or dice rolls or tape measures. It's it automates like list building. So if you're playing Guardsman and you need like 60 copies of Guy with the Last Gun, you don't sit there and go copy paste 60 times. You go, I want this model to represent Guardsman with the Last Gun. I want this model to represent this type of unit. And so that's where the automation comes in, which is the part that nobody likes doing anyway. Nobody likes going, once you've made your list, nobody then goes, oh, I'm going to enjoy picking up 120 models and putting them in this case. That's not the part of the experience that anybody enjoys. And so that's the stuff that's automated in the really like concentrated, really massive communities. But the stuff that's important, the stuff that makes the game, I've never seen any automation for it in 40k in any of the mods.
On list building itself, it's actually pretty cool because you can import any PDFs, JPEGs, and whatever else as physical objects that you can stretch in size and bring up to your face, essentially. And yeah, so I can go on to Easy Army, I can create my list, I can save it as a PDF and inject it into the game. And then, I can pick and choose my models from there, right-click them, click Save, and then go on to Gorchin's table that he's never seen these models before and physically drag them on, and it just downloads on his PC and it's ready to go. So that's really cool. Particularly in the 40k stuff, the one game that I actually had a look at Gorchin playing, which was really cool, is it could inject a Battlescribe file and make the models, right?
So basically, it read. You'd put the Battlescribe file onto a website, and it spit out like a 10-character string, and you'd paste that into the mod, and it would go, okay, here's your unique list of models. Tell me what you want to represent each one. And then it assigns all of the stats and the special rules and the war gear to that model. So when you hover over them, it tells you what they're equipped with if it's not immediately obvious. And so, like I said, stuff like that's automated, which again, you don't need to automate on a tabletop because either they're modeled or you have your list in front of you and your opponent can just look at your list. It's a non-issue. But I think there's something we're sort of skirting around the issue here a little bit. Dan, you've got some interesting ideas on how to play boltaction solo, from what I've heard.
Yeah, so I've actually had a game going over the last 3 or 4 days, just slowly tinkering it away in my garage. I was going to have someone over for a game. That didn't happen. I went, well, instead of wasting all the effort I put to setting it up, I'll play a game. There are many ways on how to do solo simulation. It depends on the scale of game. For example, way back in the early days of Kill Team, we had automated sentries, AI board games where the units have set maneuvers that they'll do, things like that, as well as more random and chaotic elements. So they might move a random direction, cast a random spell, shoot a random gun or whatever. So that's one part of the simulation, but you actually have to mentally be able to either do one or two things. The way I do it, my wife thinks I'm a little bit of a psychopath, but I can separate myself into 2 player minds. And so the way that works is simply when I'm player 1, I look at the board, I look at the order dice I've got, and I take the best possible action that player 1 could take to win the game. Then when I draw a player 2 dice, I do exactly the same process, but disregarding anything player 1 does. It's pretty difficult to explain that to people, but as soon as they watch on a tabletop, they go, that makes total sense, because you're essentially just playing the game as you would as if you were a player. You just have that interaction twice. The other way to do it is to essentially script your units so that they follow a predetermined path. So if they are, say, 13, 14 inches away from an objective, they'd make an advanced move towards that objective. If they were, if it was an anti-tank gun, it would scan the battlefield for a tank threat and either go on ambush or take a shot. So you can actually set those things up so that when a dice comes out, you randomly allocate which of the enemy units gets that dice, and then you do the set action. So you can, I have done it, you can actually do that in Tabletop Simulator just using the 1 player and just have 2 armies loaded. It's not as fun. It's always more fun to play with someone, and to the banter that happens naturally during a game. Those of us that are obviously on this call, you would have seen my Panzer rise from the ashes in that game that we played. You need to get painted. The virtual demon Panzer. It was on 5 or 6 pins. Something ridiculous. rolled
It had
double
absolutely
one.
no business doing any of that, Dan.
Yeah. It basically it showed how broken the dice generator was. But you know, but those sorts of things are always better with another player. But there are options for simulation, and so those two methods, the scripting or essentially taking the best possible action at any given time, they're the two methods that I use mainly. I find that they give the best result when trying to actually play against myself. It's the most consistent.
There's, I think there's something in that every player can take to every game, not just the ones that they play solo. What you're trying to do there effectively is going, what is my objectives that I'm trying to achieve with my army? What are the strengths I'm trying to play to? What are the weaknesses I'm trying to cover up? Now, this may sound really obvious saying it out loud. Your opponent on any given day and any given match is doing the exact same thing. And oftentimes you're spending all of your mental capacity, your willpower, whatever you want to call it, focusing on your side of the table. And that makes sense. But if you spend a little bit of time thinking, if I was my opponent and I've presented him this situation, what would I do in his place? Or what would I try to do with the next die, the dice after that? So if it seems like this exercise in solo play is self-indulgent and not necessarily for yourself, it's like, oh, that's not sort of the space that I play in. Try coming at it from perhaps a competitive way, or if you're not looking at it for fun, looking at it goes, how can I get better at this game? Because there are plenty of those people who like those board games and they like bolt action from that competitive setting. And this is an excellent way to practice. And if it sounds really absurd, trust me, people do it in every ring, not just on a tabletop. They do it on 6x4s, they do it on rings surrounded by ropes, they do it in octagons. They're asking themselves, what is my opponent trying to do? When are they trying to do it? How are they trying to do it? And how can I stop that from happening? So the more that you can put yourself in your opponent's shoes, the better. And this is where it gets really like, I'm over here playing chess and you're playing checkers, is then, okay, what is my opponent going to do? What does he think that I'm going to do? And I'm going to do something even different. And so that's where you're interrupting their decision-making process. But you end up in a very frustrating inception space. So try not to do that in a solo game, because you'll probably just shut down and pass out.
I think particularly for bolt action, it's a little bit easier to play this one-on-one with yourself, because you have the random activations of the order dice. I find that every single wargame I've ever committed to painting and playing and trying to learn, you go through that quick starter rule book and you face off with the two armies a few times at your house before you man up and play a game at the club or whatever. And whenever you do that, in a lot of those I go games, you're already going, I kind of like that turn, how that was playing out for that side. So, mentally, I kind of want them to win. But I think with that, just the order dice, that makes it more interesting that those are individual combats rather than like 40 or 50 minutes committed to one side of moving stuff and assaulting and attacking, and then going, okay, I kind of feel like I want to play the tower side or something like that. That's just how I feel.
That's a good point. That's a good point, Jacob. It's the turn activation, because of how it has been structured. It's it genuinely is good, and you can do those steps a lot easier. Just clear that. And I think there's a lot to be said for the random allocation as well. So some of the things that I've been sort of working with my tactics stuff in the background. One of them is learn from the aftermath, which it's an overarching, I guess, principle in wargaming or almost anything. When it all goes pear-shaped, when your opponent does something that completely takes you off guard, learn from that. Actually look at, how did that occur? what was the gap in my battle plan, which basically meant that was the linchpin that undid the whole thing. I have learnt more from my defeats, of which there have been several, you know, and where my opponent has gone in, and not just like the close defeats, but like where I have been put through the washing machine, tumble dried, put out to dry, beaten with a stick, dropped on the ground again, stomped on, like the whole box and dice. You learn more by picking those games apart and going, what really didn't work? Like, where did it all fall down? Yeah, so it's quite good to reflect on them in those ways. So the chaotic element is also good to learn from, as Gorchin was saying. With you if you want to get better at the game, you do that by playing. That's ultimately the bottom line. So the more ways that you can play, the better you should get.
Yep.
The caveat to that, of course, is something you touch on there, Dan, is intentional practice, right? So there's absolutely nothing wrong playing the game to have a good time. I don't think anybody's saying otherwise, except me. I don't have any fun. But if you want to get better at something, it's not just playing it. It's about having some time to debrief or to analyze or to do something about that. So one of the things that I really like to do is partly because the guys at the club are just good guys to hang out with, is after the game, just have a chat to your opponent about the game. I know that sounds really obvious, but try to do like a turn-by-turn account. And just because there are things here that, I will sit there and I'll try to think about what my opponent's thinking, and I will be wrong most of the time. But on that odd activation die that you're right, that might give you the advantage. And it helps give me some insight. It's like, what are the things that I did wrong? What are the things that I did right? I had this. I remember one game I played against Nick, and I think we were playing a slightly different scale. We were playing like company level bolt action with Flames War minis and stuff. But yeah, I just did this like massive infantry charge right through the middle, like machine guns and infantry, and I was just running around my Shermans in pairs, just completely and utterly in every angle, just have something that he had to deal with. Now, he could have very easily defeated all the detail, but he was just, I remember after the game, he was just like, I just didn't know where to start.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. So that strategy worked. But there was a lot of other things in that game that really didn't work. Like trying to have long range firefights against Germans. It's just a bad move altogether. And trying to go toe to toe with tanks. But those after action reports and having that intentional practice, like you can absolutely have fun in your game and not take it very seriously, but if you want to learn and get better, the best time to do it is in the game. The second best time is immediately afterwards. Try to maybe, if you're kind of raw and emotional, some people don't take getting dumpstered very well, which is understandable. But think about it until it's think about it until it's sort of normal and you can think about it clearly, and then at that point start analyzing the decisions. If your conclusions are the game is busted and it's shit and it's unbalanced, that could be a reasonable conclusion. Most of the time, keep going, keep thinking.
Yeah, I think that's very good feedback, Orchin. So I think then one of the biggest pitfalls, and this is a bit of a segue into our next topic, one of the biggest pitfalls in solo play and simulation is how do you get around pre-measuring? Like you're literally measuring both sides of the table, right? So, and I want to preface this by going, what we're going to talk about is just simply our views and opinions on pre-measuring. It's not the be all end all. We're not sold one way or the other. We don't think you're a bad gamer if you do. We don't think you're a bad gamer if you don't. This is simply talking about the fact that pre-measuring is a thing. So when you are pre-measuring essentially both sides of the table, you have to make a choice to either use that knowledge or try hard to not connect the dots. And that's something which in most cases when you're playing with yourself or playing bolt action against yourself, just accept you're going to know what the ranges are. It's actually going to speed the game up, and you don't have an opponent that's going to care because it's you. So don't feel that you have to try to hide the measurements of things from yourself in simulation. It slows it down, and it's not worth the mental effort of trying to do that. Just simply go, I'm going to accept that I'm going to measure something one way, and that's going to make me know what the other way is.
Mm-hmm.
So there's on the pre-measuring front, there's been a little bit of a furor recently about pre-measuring and bolt action, and it sort of comes from this idea that in the rulebook it says you can't pre-measure. Okay, fair enough, you can't. You're under a social contract, verbal, when you play a game of bolt action, that you don't pre-measure. Yet somehow the recent Tiger Fear FAQ has made people suddenly realize that, oh, we can pre-measure all the time whenever we're sitting against a German tank that's got Tiger Fear. That's exactly what that means, right?
Well, not really. So yeah, this has, and the three of us have talked about this before, just so everyone knows that. But pre-measuring actually existed before Tiger Fear was a thing. Before Tiger Fear actually existed as a rule. It actually existed before bolt action was a game, because the mechanics that you innately use to move your models around the table allows you to pre-measure with simple mathematics. So it's something which a lot of people are jumping up and down about because Tiger Fear specifically says you're allowed to pre-measure. I would encourage those people to read the rule properly, because you measure from the tank out, not from your unit through the tank. So you're only ever going to confirm what a 12-inch bubble around a tank looks like. But there's a whole bunch of things that go into this. Like, we've talked about before, you play war games long enough, you can eyeball distances on the table. Mm-hmm. So you don't necessarily pre-measure by dragging the tape measure across the table. Mm-hmm. But someone moves on 12, you move on 12, guaranteed they're 24 inches apart, unless you're playing on a table that's longer than 4 foot. That's just math. Like, you're not pre-measuring, but you are. It's just innately what you can do. And that's only one example.
You'll witness that quite a bit in different ways. You'll have people that will identify how big a terrain tile is. You have people that might measure where how far a terrain piece is, and not necessarily any interactions with the models and their units they have, maybe even pre-game. And I don't have any viewpoints on that either way. I figure if you've mapped that out in your mind, or if you've had a look at it, I think if that's part of your strategy, it is. Soldiers would be looking at maps. They'd be trying to figure things out before the battle happened. So I don't know. I don't see that it's a massive issue, and I can't imagine that there are too many specific scenarios where it's all that important. There are times where you may make the charge and you may not, and there may be times where you're just out of SMG range and you're not. But it's not a game-changing scenario anyway. So I haven't had a problem with it, and I kind of just don't care.
And that's sort of where I sit as well. Like, it's I prefer not to, because I like the challenge of trying to estimate the ranges on the battlefield. But if my opponent actually said, no, look, I really do want to pre-measure, because it makes it easier for me to play the game, I'd be okay with that. Mm-hmm. I'd be making it easier for my opponent to play the game with me, which means I get to play the game. It means that there's no confusion about distances, so that's always a good thing. And I'm able to estimate ranges quite well, so that's a tool in my arsenal that I use when I play games. But if my opponent really isn't good at that, it is a little bit of an unfair advantage for me to force that upon them. And so I'm happy to go either way. Most of my players that I normally play with are happy just to do it without pre-measuring, and we're good to go. But it's so. For example, you can pre-measure without pre-measuring. We gave the example of movement. There's the example of knowing how far a terrain piece is from the back edge. You can actually get the ranges of terrain whilst moving your models, which helps you understand scale on the battlefield. That's a way that you can interpret range. Indirect fire weapons allow you to interpret range because you literally measure out to the distance. And so you can get a rough idea how far away something is. Obviously, Tiger Fear has come through to be 12 inches, but you have other ways that people don't think of. Templates, smoke markers, barrage, airstrikes, like anything that lets you measure probably more than 4 inches, I would say, on the table somewhere.
Yeah.
You can use that as a relative guide to estimate range on the table.
There's a couple of relative guides that I like to use. Some of this is just a little bit of rote learning, and some of it sort of seems, again, self-evident when you say that out loud. Typically in bolt action, I think the Warlord games bases are actually 25 mil. Most of the bases that you buy for this scale are around 25 mil. That means each base is an inch. If you stick a 10-man squad, and you just sort of pick them up and blob them onto the table, and they're sort of 5 across and then 5 across. That's a 5 by 2 inch rectangle right there. You can sort of mentally copy paste that across the board to get some distances. Another rough example, a rough bit of guideline is that the short edge of a board is 48 inches, which means if you've moved an infantry squad in from that table edge and they've moved one off the other table edge, you're within LMG range, more or less, because there's 6 inches that side, 6 inches that side, you're at 36. So the general rule of thumb with bolt action is turn 1, LMGs may be a BAR if you've got some very aggressive positioning in range. Turn 2, that's when rifles start activating and really becoming dangerous. Turn 3, that's when SMGs start being in range. Now that's of course some very rough rules of thumb. And it depends on a dozen other factors like terrain and transports and a whole bunch of other things. But those are some things to keep in mind. If you're, and it's something you can take into list building. If you're planning on dishing out a lot of damage very early on in the game, you got to be packing 36 inches or plus weapons.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're just going to hide and then bolt action. Of course, you've got cover and all the other mechanics as well to bring into play. But yeah, if you want to deal damage early, you need to bring 36 plus. If you want to deal damage on turn 2, that's when you can start getting away with rifles and BARs.
Yeah.
Just a super
Absolutely.
basic one for those getting new into it. Just seeing what the previous round of combat was with, if rifles were in range, and you can get an estimate of how far you're going to have to move up for SMGs and that kind of stuff. And you'll easily pick up that you just took some shots from X. You've got an idea of how far it is for you to get from other units on the field. And you'll just pick that up and go, I know that's about 12 inches away or something like that. So, I don't care. I don't think it needs the hundreds of posts that are on Facebook and otherwise at the moment.
I would agree.
But yeah, Tiger Fear needed some changes, so there you go.
But I guess the and just I guess quickly on the Tiger Fear thing, that was less about pre-measuring, which has become the result of the change. Tiger Fear was being done because of board control. It was putting something at the back of the field that had board control over everything, and that's not how the game's designers wanted Tiger tanks to be used. Again, arguments 2 and 4 in terms of competitive use and whether or not big tanks are worth it in competitive play. But the counter argument is that bolt action isn't designed competitively. So, for example, recently Juggernaut has set up their second version of the rules, which I've had a chance to look over. And in WA, we've got a pretty healthy discussion at the moment about, what do we want to adopt out of that? Do we want to look at it? Is there a need? I genuinely think it'd be good for us to, firstly, at least try it out, play some home games or tabletop simulator with it. And, I'm not opposed to making changes to see what works and what doesn't. The Juggernaut guys are totally happy for people to either take none of it or all of it. But they've done things to push it into a competitive direction a little bit more than what it has right now. But it's good that we've got that. It's good that we've got something to work on. They dealt with Tiger Fear completely differently to how I would have, and they simply removed it and put a discount on the big tanks because they wanted to see big tanks on the battlefield to a certain degree. That makes sense.
Just going to bring up the PDF in a moment and just have a quick skim through because I actually haven't looked at it yet. But what are the takeaway changes?
My takeaway on the whole is that I can see what they're going for, but for me, it felt that on one part of any given page of that of the Juggernauts sort of format, you saw some things that were like, okay, I can see where they're going. This is you're stratifying, you're adding points costs to things that didn't have them, you're adding slots, and you're sort of rebalancing and re-bean counting bolt action so it's more competitive. It's like I get that, and then on the flip side, you've got this is. We don't see enough big tanks, so we're just going to make the first one that you buy just cheaper.
Yeah, Panther minus 75. Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, or we're just going to give you free LMGs if you get 10-man squads. Now, I don't in principle disagree with any of that. And like I said, in many of the comments that have gotten some less than positive attention in some cases, is that these things need to be tried, and we absolutely need to give them a go. It's just for me, it's a little inconsistent. I've read through some of their comments that they've got BARs are really strong, and then they didn't point cost them up, but then they point costed down, which for the tanks, which they thought were underutilized and is sort of implied to be over expensive, and they give you free LMGs, again sort of implying that LMGs are more expensive than they should be. And so for me, it seems like there's a core competitiveness in that is also unfortunately for me, the vibe that I'm getting is at odds with this is also fun how we like to play bolt action. It doesn't need to be either. It can happily be both. But for me, my takeaway there was it sort of needs to do one or the other, and I'm not sure which one it's doing just yet.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. It's having looked at one of the changes, because I guess the thing is as well, everyone has their own idea about what the best change looks like. And so I'm always very hesitant to deliberately shoot someone's idea out of the sky, because ultimately it's the same as me shooting my own idea out of the sky with no testing, no talking to developers, no talking to other people. It's one of the reasons that my mission packs and the missions that go in them are fairly solid if they're brand new, is because I don't just cowboy it in and go, this is what we're going to do. But the HMG teams, medium machine gun teams, them being able to do an automatic pin plus a pin if they hit, that's fairly powerful. I don't think it's unreasonable. I'd probably would have done D3 or even D2 pins in total, but that's just a different tact. One of the glaring omissions that I think they've missed is heavy machine guns stayed at 3 shots. You start talking about discounting German tanks. What about all of the other heavy tanks across any other forces that some of them don't have special rules? That's fine. The entire American battle line does, with gyro-stabilized if they're veterans, but there's no discount there. So you're innately, again, not saying it's right or wrong, but innately, if you're adjusting one part of the balance to account for something that's foreseen as not effective, but then you don't adjust the other side, either in points up or points down, or modifying the rule, you're still creating imbalance within a competitive set. So, and I would almost say that, if they turned around and went, well, we haven't modified heavy machine guns because no one takes them for 25 points anyway, then surely that becomes a reason to consider changing it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think you've said it much more succinctly than I did, Daniel. It's I don't mean this in a detractory way, but as you said, they've pulled levers for some nations with one set of framework, but then not applied that same thinking and pulled the same lever somewhere else. And I think that for me was the thing that sort of kept cropping up. I was like, I didn't disagree with any of the changes individually, but as a whole, it seems that there's something not pulling it all together.
Understandably, though, there are how many nations are there, books and theaters and all that kind of stuff. You can't do it all in one go. But I know what you're saying.
Yeah, and the thing that the automatic pin on a machine gun, regardless of if it hits, I think for me is it's not in and of itself, as you said, it's powerful, but it's not game breaking. I think for me it just sets a very dangerous precedent. It's like, okay, we did this once in this little rule tweak, why don't we just start putting an automatic pin here, why don't we start putting an automatic pin there? And that to me, that was the only part that I went, ooh, I'm really not sure about that. I like that they're doing something with the MMGs and HMGs. They need something to be relevant. I think we've said this probably a dozen times on this podcast so far. But I'm not sure if an automatic pin is the right way to go. And one of the things that I find, this is boltaction in general, moving away from sort of a specific fencer, is that penetration doesn't reduce cover modifiers for that specific shooting. And I was thinking, I was like, oh, that's a weird thing that didn't change HMGs. Why don't you just make HMGs turn hard cover into light cover and light cover into no cover? And then I was like, ooh, but HMGs are only +1. What does that mean for +2, +3, +4? And I read that and I was like, okay, that's actually quite a tricky and nuanced way to go about that. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what the solution is, of course, but again, it's just that idea that it's like they chose to pull that lever, but then didn't pull it everywhere else for the same sort of ideas.
And look, I still want to try it. I still want to give it a go. But we're
Absolutely.
in our meta, in our scene, we've obviously got a different lens that we view that through. I know that there's a couple of key members of our community that they want that competitive edge, and so this is quite attractive to them. And so, that might mean that we do run a couple of events specifically using Juggernaut, and making it clear to everyone that this is what we're going to use. Or we might adjust it slightly so that it fits what we want, but still hitting that T. But look, I think I like seeing fan-made supplemental information and different ways to play the game. It's refreshing. It keeps the game scene alive, and more importantly, it lets you know that there's different ways to play. There's different ways to actually pull these things together, and that grows the community. So I think that's really good.
So we've talked a lot about Juggernaut's house rules, which are based on changes to units, but they've got two other parts to this document as well. So with the selector, you've got this ability where, depending on the amount of points that you spend on a particular slot, you can unlock additional spends in those slots. So if you spend a certain amount of money in a tank slot, you can upgrade to 2 tanks, something like that. So yeah, it says 3 points for a tank.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, you have to actually unlock it in multiple sections to get that. Then there's some information on selector units and sort of adding those in where they don't quite exist in a generic platoon. And then they've got some modifications on Well, actually, no. These are entirely new missions that replace some of the rulebook ones.
Yes,
So
they are.
there are
Yeah,
some modifications. So that's really cool.
Some custom missions in there that they've done, which are pretty solid. I had a look at those, obviously as a TO.
Yeah.
I think the selector stuff is quite interesting because it's trying to, again, leaning towards that competitive element. There's some things in there that I get what they're trying to do, but I don't think it's because what they're trying to do is essentially go, there's one selector, and if you want to have all the goodies in that selector, it's going to cost you in these slot points, and the slot points you get are driven by the size of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So in a standard 1,000-point game, I think it's 1 per 200 points. So you'd end up with five slot points. So if you want 2 tanks, that's going to be 3 slot points, as well as the points for the unit itself that are separate. So call it credits, or call it points that you can spend extra on your list to unlock slots. But they've got it on some very, I guess they must be very meta-intensive units. Like, for example, they've got an assault engineer squad with a flamer. For every one of those squads you want to take after the first, it's 2 slot points. I'm not going to comment, obviously, on the ratio of points versus effectiveness, because I think they probably have done that well. But there's some drastic things that are missing from that list in my book. The shoots are put in as a basic infantry squad. They can just take the free LMG. They don't have to. They still don't have to pay for that from Western Desert.
Yeah.
They get that 60 point, but they're not included for a multiple choice. And so essentially you can have 5 squads full of shoots and pay for the extra, let's say 5 points worth to include 5 more infantry squads, which are just 5 more squads worth of shoots. And all of a sudden you have almost 11 squads worth of shoots and with free LMGs. That's a lot of infantry. That's a lot of light machine guns. Obviously the points have to go with that as well. But for us in our scene, we have generally done generic platoon or theater selector. We don't cross over those orphan units. We simply say those orphan units belong to those theater selectors. So you can't take them unless you're taking that theater selector. Again, different metas, different setups. I also put some restrictions on every single event that I run. So you can't run more than 2 flamer teams.
Yeah.
You're just not allowed to. So that stops the assault engineer squad being a problem, because you can only have 2 flamer teams.
I'm with you. I think we've gone over Juggernaut. Definitely super interesting. This stuff is coming out. But we need to try it, and we haven't yet. We've only discovered it this week.
2 days ago.
And this might be their second variant of the actual rules. But I'm kind of new to learning about the Juggernaut podcast itself. All right. What else have we got to talk about?
Dan, have you got any of your tactic stuff you're ready to share with us just yet?
Yeah, I was just having a quick look at that. I probably want to think about talking about the ambush order is probably the next thing. So there's a couple of ambush tactics that are out. As long as you guys have time.
I'm all in.
Yeah. So I won't read it word for word. I'll just summarize what I've written up. But ultimately, ambush is probably... That earphone was really getting annoying. I don't know if you all saw me trying to push that back in, but ambush is by far one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful order that you can give a unit within a game. That's basically broken down to the fact that you can give them the order, and so they're able to drop a pin on the unit by successfully passing it. And you proactively set that order up to react to an opponent, but you can take those reactions before your opponent literally gets to do anything. And you can either attempt to take a shot when they move or go down. And obviously you can hold the ambush order across multiple turns if you chose to. Now, that sort of gives you an idea of how powerful it is, but then I've actually broken it down a little bit further and go, well, let's analyze those different stages, those different elements. Now, if you guys have questions, feel free to jump in so that this isn't a monologue. But this is definitely an education piece, because ambush is still something that I don't see a lot of players really using to its full potential. Yeah, Gorchin's got his hand up there. So ambush is not something that you do on turn 1 or even really on turn 2, because you have to position your unit first. Once you have positioned the unit, that's when the ambush order becomes a viable option. It does depend on the target that you want to hit. It does depend on the position of where you are, because you do need good line of sight to be able to actually make good use of that ambush order. And because you're going to be probably stationary, you're going to want to make sure that your firing unit is in some sort of cover. You don't particularly want to ambush out in the open. I haven't been ambushed, but none of the ambushes that I watch in movies, read in books, read in accounts, none of them were necessarily just in the open waiting for it to happen. So it's quite thematic that you stick to terrain. It's also very good in the game to stick to terrain. So then we get to, let's say we've now got a unit on ambush. You're trying to target a unit of infantry. You get to your trigger points, which is either performing a type of move. So it needs to be any form of move action. I believe it actually includes consolidating from combat, so you can still snipe someone off if they get a cheeky charge in.
Does it also include recce?
So the ambushing shot will trigger on recce, but your recce vehicle could still potentially get away. So, and the reason I say that is if the recce vehicle has activated prior to the unit going into ambush, and so it's moving, and you declare that you're going to stop it, it's had an order assigned to it, so it can't use its recce reaction. But you have to take the shot from where you choose to stop it. So if you don't stop it in open terrain and it's got cover and whatever, it's probably going to survive and then you just continue its move. That's just more ambushing in general. You have to choose your timing of where to stop the target. But you can use it against recce. It works much better against a recce vehicle when you have 2 units on ambush with overlapping fields of fire. So you fire the first one at the end of the turn at the recce vehicle, because the recce vehicle's been waiting to be shot. It declares a recce. You then trigger the second ambush that's got the crossfire. The recce vehicle can't recce from that, and so it takes the hit. Or if you hit, it takes the hit. Yeah, recce sort of undoes ambush a little bit because it's specifically designed to be able to hit and run away, or more specifically in bolt action, run away from being hit. But yeah, that's just an interaction at that point.
So that's where I was thinking. I was like, if I've, typically at 1,000 or 1,250 for my US list, I've got a light howitzer and a Sherman. So I'm usually using the Sherman to take out any armor that's a particularly big threat, and I'm using my light howitzer either to go door knocking on 7, 8 toughness vehicles, or I'm using it for pins of buildings or whatever. And naturally, of course, recce's a pain in the butt for anybody who's trying to take out a vehicle. But then again, also recce, you only typically find it on 7 or lower. I think there's an 8 that's got recce. Anyway, I think, but basically you can hit it with light howitzer. So I was just wondering, could I just stick my howitzer in ambush, shoot at the thing with the Sherman, force it to move, and then knock it out with the howitzer? And that was something I'd never actually thought of doing. I think one of my challenges that I'm having with bolt action is, of course, moving from an I go, you go, I can activate my whole force at the whole time. I'm slowly adapting to this order dice mechanic. One of the things I'm definitely not doing outside of Snap 2 is thinking about my second and third order dice that I haven't pulled out yet.
Yeah.
Which of course that ambush tactic requires. Right?
Mm.
For you
Yes, it
to
does.
double ambush a recce vehicle, you need to be thinking not about this order dice and not about your opponent's next one, but your one that comes after, which could be 4 or 5 dice later. It could be straight away.
Yes. And that's where the advantage of, I'd actually probably do it the other way. I would actually lead with your howitzer with a direct fire shot on the recce vehicle and use the Sherman with the anti-tank profile, unless you're using a 105, in which case they're both howitzers, so it's fine. But
Sure.
but yeah, go follow up with the Sherman. The benefit of the ambush order is you know that recce vehicle is not going to move until you declare a shot at it. What you can do is essentially force that recce vehicle, if you really want to push ambush, you force that recce vehicle to actually take its move. So you actually don't, because it's going to get to its dice eventually, right?
Mm.
So that your opponent's probably going to hold off till it's the very last dice, and it'll be the last thing that they move. And you'll have one howitzer and one Sherman on ambush going, go on, we dare you to move. We've got 2 shots. We'll make it happen. Like it's gonna go down. So you don't even have to trigger it as soon as that Sherman's dice comes out of the bag. You can actually wait right till the end of turn, providing that it doesn't change anything else in the game plan or what you need to accomplish. You can really basically put it down and go, that's a dead recce vehicle. Like you're going to avoid one shot by moving, but then what's going to happen is I'm going to stop you from moving with my second shot, which may immobilize you or keep you there. If you survive that recce shot, you then have to stop for the second ambushing shot because your recce response has been interrupted from the first ambushing shot. So you generally want some form of damage off that second ambushing shot so that it holds it in place, because if they do survive, they can still zip off and finish the recce move. But
that's a really interesting way to counter recce's, because I am always fielding them and I'm always stuck at that dilemma. How am I activating this unit? Do I use it to bait to get some shot that never happens, or do I actually use it as a unit that it needs to do something up the field? And that recce really dictates the move on. Like it almost forces me to be unable to make a decision even further.
Yeah, exactly. And that's sorry, just adjusting my camera here because it's
there was this.
I plugged the charger in and it's wrecked it.
There was this interesting tactic I was playing against one of the other strong players here in the Perth scene. Matt Castles was playing a game against him earlier, and he's sort of taken an effort to teach me to get better at boltaction. And he had this sniper in this great position who was just locking down this whole side of the field. It was the top of turn 1. We were playing meeting engagement, and I'm sitting there thinking, I was like, what do I bring on to deal with this sniper? He's in the middle of the board, so he's 24 inches away. If I bring an infantry squad on, sure, I'm gonna eventually chase him out, right him out of the hole. And Matt was like, just roll on your Sherman and hit the building with HE. And I was like, but that's a waste of the Sherman. He's like, sure, you could sling a shot at my tank and we can get into sanctified tank combat, or you could just take out an order dice right there. What's the sniper going to do against a Sherman? It's going to open up the whole side of the field. And it was just something I'd never thought about. And it's this, those challenges that I'm having is that you use armor to take out armor, which I should know better than that because I've read the US tank doctrine manuals of World War II. And the other thing is, it's just like, use your dice in pairs because you have 10 of them on a 1,000-point game. And these are actually some things that I'm really struggling to wrap my head around, or to actually even just think about. Like, once you said it, it makes perfect sense. It's just, why would I ever try to use more than one dice at a time, Daniel? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And that's
that chess background.
The whole reason that I'm doing these tactic article stuff is so we can uncover these things that I naturally think about. Like my brain goes a million miles an hour tossing all these things over, and I started this probably 2 years ago. I realized about 2 years ago, not everyone thinks like I do when it comes to war games. And some of the stuff that I process, and I'm doing it so naturally because I've been doing it for years, people just don't think about. And it would really benefit them and help them play better to think about it. So, because I mean, the other big thing that makes ambush so effective is when you flip it to those fire orders, you're stationary. So you don't ever take that -1 for movement. And generally, you're going to hit something that's within half range. The odds of you actually getting hits and damage with your units that haven't been moved are just better. They are just flat out better. That's why the Finns, especially Matt Castles, who plays his Finns quite well, the Finns can be so dangerous because he will deliberately just advance and go down into ambush with the recon squads. And then you're stuck between a rock and a hard place because you do go, I need to advance on the objectives, but I know I'm going to get hit for like 3s or 4s. If I've got hard cover, maybe 5s, but he's not going to take range penalty. He's not going to take movement penalty. And I can't go down because I'm advancing as part of the order. So you're not going to get any better than that anyway. It becomes a very dangerous sort of interaction to find yourself in. But that, I guess, goes to, how can ambush then be used to control the board? Because you can essentially, and I've done it before, I've done it with a medium machine gun. Everyone writes them off as horrible, absolutely horrible, not worth taking. I'd rather spend 5 points on 5 individual rifles and be able to move and fire, run them up the field, do all that sort of stuff. The first comment I would have for that is the HMG teams can actually still move relatively quickly. They're not as slow as what people think. But if you put a 5-shot gun on ambush, covering a choke point or a road or an intersection, or even just point it at an objective and put it on Overwatch with the ambush, your opponent's going to think twice because, again, you don't take that -1 for movement. And so your opponent's going to come out and have 5 shots that are going to essentially be looking at 3s or 4s to hit. You can't go down. You might get hard cover, but hard cover is essentially just going to make it 5s unless you're at long range. Benefit of the machine gun, really long range. So move that thing up the field at the front line, point it at an objective and put it on ambush for the rest of the game. Your opponent's then going to look at it and going, it's 5 dice. Do I really want to risk the pin and potentially the damage, considering that I've already done my order, and so I'm going to be stuck with that order next turn with needing to do a test. But it also means that if that unit was going to shoot at something, it's not effective straight away. You're -1 straight up. That's quite a significant amount of board control you can put down. But the actual strength of your ambush is entirely dependent on how far away you are from the target and the number of shots that you're firing. The penetration of the weapon makes little difference. It's actually a number of shots and how far away, because they're the prime indicators for those hit modifiers. The further away you are, the harder it is to hit something. The more shots you have, the higher your chance of hitting something. That's, again, simple ratios with math. But I've got a formula that's in the document, which I won't bother reading out, but it's essentially that concept that I just talked about of leveraging shots and distance to assign a rating out of 5 against the strength. So if we looked at a unit of 10 Soviet SMG troops that are within 6 inches of a target unit, and the target unit is not in cover, for example, 20 shots, 6 inches away, that's going to cause a lot of damage. Like, those guys don't take movement penalty, so they would have got to that 6-inch range with no difference. Maybe they've just hopped around the side of a fence to negate the cover bonus that was being applied to the unit. So they're going to hit on 3s or 2s, quite dangerous, and convert straight up for damage. Conversely, if you take a light howitzer that is targeting the same squad, but they're 34 inches away, you have a single shot, you're 34 inches away, so you're over half range. and you're only going to be able to place that gorgeous marker down on that unit if they don't go down as a response to being targeted. If they choose to go down, you're looking at 7s. Like, it's just, you're so unlikely to hit. It's like 0.01% or something stupid. Like, it's just not going to happen as a reliable mechanic if you're on ambush. If it was a tank, it's completely the other way around, because the tank can be hurt by light howitzer, doesn't care about submachine guns at all. And so the rating is different in that space. But when you're setting things up, what you're trying to do, if you're putting your stuff into ambush, you're trying to find the choke points in the terrain. You're trying to find where the approach points to the objectives are. You're looking at, is there a unit in the building that's going to need to commit to the battlefield? Are there units in outflank that you can just sit in ambush on the side? Do I have something like snipers are good in ambush? I don't use mine in ambush enough. I do a lot of just sort of single shots with the sniper. I probably need to have them on ambush more, but a team like a Panzerschreck team comes around the corner to get a shot at your Sherman. The sniper would be able to take them out on ambush relatively well. It's a 3+ to hit. They take no other modifiers. Now, we all know snipers roll 1s and 2s, but putting that aside, once they get the hit, even if they just get the hit and no kill, the conversion rate of that Panzerschreck team to actually kill that tank is significantly less. You've given them that pin, and that pin's going to be in effect when they take their shot.
Wow. Yeah.
So just, it sounds, again, it's going to sound really stupid saying it out loud coming out of my mouth. I've never thought of putting the ambush order on my sniper, which is, again, a real stupid thing to say out loud.
Bloodthirsty. You want that kill right there and then when you got the dice.
Everyone wants to go for the observer kill on turn 1. Everyone wants it.
Yeah.
No, I'm much more honorable. My tank still tanks. My sniper still snipers. But so I think there's it's good. That speaks much more about me not knowing, me forgetting that there's 6 sides to that order dice, and that 6th side being ambush. But the thing that you sort of touched on there, and some heuristics for people out there who are wondering how to do some quick mental math. People, as a general rule of thumb, people understand percentages better than out of 6s. So to give you an idea, every +1 on a dice is roughly 16%. So the difference between a 2+ and a 3+ is 16% less likely. And so you just, now of course it doesn't add up perfectly because 3 16s makes 48. But as a general rule of thumb, 4+ 50-50, 5+ is a 32% chance of success, 6+ is a 16% chance of success. So when you're asking yourself, do I move to overcome range or something like, so moving to overcome range is a bad example because it's +1 -1, but for some other things to think about is what are you actually gaining? And a lot of times the decisions that I've seen my opponents get stuck on when it comes to bolt action, it's a difference of 16%. So they will be, and this is the thing, like, again, if we say most of your opponents are regular, it's always better to get an extra hit die than it is to get a +1 penetration, because +1 penetration is only an extra 16% chance to convert a kill, but an extra hit die is typically either an extra 50% or 32% chance if they're veteran to get a kill. So it's almost always better to get a second shot or get an additional shot die, whether it's another team shooting or anything like that, than it is to get a +1 penetration. That's something to think about in list building, which is why I think HMGs are in such a poor spot, really, because I think if
horrible.
I haven't actually done the math, so if anybody, so please feel free to call me out on this, but I think assuming like most of the time your MMG actually has a better kill rate, not a hit rate, actually has a better kill rate than a HMG on any given target, all things being equal. But Yeah. So
largely
if anybody would actually like to do the math, please do so. Take that with a cup of salt. But I think just from looking at that, I think MMGs have a higher kill turnover rate than HMGs on any given dice roll.
One of the things on ambush particular in the actual activation of the ambush itself, Daniel, can you explain how the range comes into effect? Because you're essentially activating the ambush at any point of the opposing player's movement, right? So that can negate additional modifiers in itself.
Yeah, so that's actually in the next part where it moves on from control, so using ambush to control something. So triggering ambushes, using ambush to control the battlefield, understanding the strength of an ambush if it's arrayed against you or you're setting one up. And then the next part is actually avoidance of an ambush, so which sort of falls into that space. So your opponent is able to trigger that ambush off any move at any time. So you can actually declare a movement order, and before you actually move a single model, they can trigger it and they can take a shot. So often what is going to happen, especially if the unit has to cross open space with maybe only a -1 for a light fence or something, they're going to wait until the opportune moment where they can basically hammer you in open ground to minimize their negative modifiers to get the hit. One thing that isn't covered very well in the interactions between ambushing and movement is technically, by letter of the rules, you move each model one at a time from point to point within a unit. And whilst it's doing its move, you can break unit coherency up because you're moving one model from one location to another, and so you physically have to break unit coherency in order to move that unit. That does mean that if you are between, for example, I'll just get this on the camera, if you're between two walls and the unit's going this way between the two walls, you're only ever moving one model at a time through that gap.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means is that your opponent triggering an ambush can never just shoot through the gap and get you at no cover because you're only ever moving one model, right? That's something that a lot of people play wrong because they go, I'm just going to stop you when you're covering in that gap. I'm going to shoot you with no cover modifier, and that's going to absolutely decimate your unit. That would be right, except for the fact that you only move one model at a time. Now, the way that it is played from a gentleman sportsman-like fashion is simply that the model is in the unit conga line as a whole across that space, which means that you can actually get potentially 3 or 4 models in that gap, potentially negating cover. But that's not actually how it physically works by letter of the rules. Most people don't worry about it. They know that you're on ambush. They know they're skating from cover to cover. Possibly in tournaments we would see it, but unlikely. There's not much you can do about that because you can't avoid that because you're already being triggered. It's just how you guys choose to approach that as part of the game. My personal preference is if that gap is sort of 4-5 inches wide, I'll let them have the open cover shot. Like it's a huge amount of space. If it's 1 inch wide, I'm sorry, I'm going to claim that I'm going to have cover any position of that unit, and everything else I dice off, unless it's very clear. But in terms of the range question that you had, Jacob, because they can trigger it at any point, the range is not so beneficial for you. What does make a difference when avoiding an ambush or trying to get out of an ambush is when you have 2 units that are potentially targets. And what I mean by that is you have to have a supporting unit to essentially attempt to draw the ambush to trigger to free up your other unit. So quickly in your head, you have to decide which unit is the highest priority to shoot, not to keep alive, not to avoid pins, not to do any of that stuff. Which one do I want to be able to shoot with maximum effectiveness. Because if I get shot by the ambush guys, I'm going to take a pin. I'm not shooting effectively. Once you've got that decision made, you leave that unit till last, and you move the other unit first. And that unit needs to deliberately move away from the ambushes, providing that they are at short or medium range, because that will inflict a -1 when they shoot back, if they shoot back. Don't do it if you're in the open, because you'll just get cut down in the open. But you want to try and move away from the ambushes whilst giving yourself line of sight to shoot back. You're trying to force your opponent to make a choice of shooting that unit that's just moved, even though they're further away, but might have come off cover a little bit for line of sight, or deliberately waiting for the unit that you actually want to be able to shoot at full effectiveness. So you need that support there, and it needs to be something of value for them to basically trigger. Like if you've got a medic and you're like, oh, I've got a supporting medic, I'm just going to run the medic backwards and you're going to shoot him and then I'll get to shoot at full effectiveness. That's not going to happen. Everyone's going to let the medic go.
Yeah.
They're going to deal with him later. At best, they've got a pistol that they can't shoot, and they're going to wait for your other unit. Now, if it's set up right, and if your opponent looks and goes, I'm going to get shot up by those 2 light machine guns that they've moved into range now, but they've moved further back, I'm going to get shot at, I might have to go down. So that's great, because they go down. Or they're going to eat the shots and get a pin on them, which means that when they go to trigger the fire order, they're automatically at -1. That reduces their chances to hit. If your unit that you want to shoot at full effectiveness is in cover, likely it is, you're looking at now 6s for them to hit instead of 3s or 5s. But that difference, as Goshen said, going from 5s to 6s doesn't feel like a lot, and it's not. But if you were at long range, for example, as well, you've now taken that from 6s to 7s. That's a much bigger difference. And so, that goes from sort of the potential 1 hit to you won't get a hit. That's essentially the statistical probability of a 7 on one dice. But
yeah, you go from 16% on a 6 to 3% on a 7.
Yep.
Those tank shots at 7 seem to get through.
Long range Panzerfaust, man. That's the only way to go. So that's one way to avoid the ambush, is essentially trying to use 2 units and duke out the ambush so you can shoot with the one that you want to shoot with. If you don't have a secondary supporting unit, one of the best things you can do is just choose to go down, or actually to go in ambush yourself. So if you're looking at it and you go, yep, I'm definitely going to get shot at by the end of the turn. I don't know how that's going to go. I don't have a supporting unit. I need them to hold their position. Put them in ambush. Don't put them down. When you're in ambush, you can choose to go down. So you get that secondary option to go down. When you're in down, you're stuck. Like, yes, you're harder to hit. Yes, it's a free order. You don't have to take a test. All those good things. And if you hold that order until the end of the next turn, you do shed some pins automatically. That's really good. The fact of the matter is, you can do all of those things because it relies on the down order being down. Yeah. So you have the ambush order first. Now, if multiple units are on ambush at the end of the turn, there's essentially, I can't recall, I haven't got my rule book with me here, that was silly, but there's not actually a predefined order for who tries to trigger the ambush first.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, I'll have a look
Which
through.
means so if memory serves correct, because there's no defined order, I don't think you 4+ it off. I think it's just, if a unit wants to shoot, it rolls the dice. On a 4+, it gets to take a shot. If that's the case, all that shooting actually happens simultaneously. It'd be great if you could confirm that.
Yeah, so that's
I mean, it may be like ambush actually isn't covered as its own thing as a set thing, but perhaps perhaps me reading this shooting procedure might make some sense to you. Declare a target, target reacts, measure range, open fire, roll the hit, damage, casualties, and morale.
So if you go under the orders section at the beginning
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
where it
I'll have
starts
a look
like
at that.
right at the beginning, ambush should be covered.
Yeah, it does have a one-liner, which is the unit does not move or fire. Instead, the soldiers take up firing positions and wait for the target to present itself. So that actually doesn't really detail any rules on that.
I'll be right back. I'll grab my rule book because it'll
Sure.
be beneficial for everyone.
Yeah, definitely.
So
while Dan is
so
gone,
Jacob,
yeah.
Yeah, when I played against Matt, we had a similar situation come up. What we did was, again, I guess we'll find out if it's correct or not. We basically played it like forward observers. We rolled the d6. The guy with the higher one got to activate first, and then we just alternated. We sort of talked about it, and we said, for the sake of the game, to keep the game moving, we just decided we were going to do that, and it seemed to make the most sense at the time. But of course, that'll depend on what the rulebook says.
What did you face? Did you face Matt's Fins? Okay, and this is pretty much a representation of what he physically owns.
Yeah, and that was a case of me getting dumpstered by turn 3.
Yeah.
He would never admit it, but yeah, I was slam dunked into a bin faster than you could blink.
Was this your first time facing a heavy ambush list?
He was, to be perfectly honest, he wasn't using the ambush that much. He just outplayed me and outmaneuvered me every step of the way. I don't think it would have mattered if he had his finish list or not, to be perfectly honest. I made so many mistakes, and he just absolutely steamrolled me.
What happens to most players is that they'll play a finish list and they'll learn what ambush is. And you know, the first time you play against it, you're like, what do I do? Because you're moving up and it will trigger, and then you're like, okay. After that you go, I can fire, and they won't be able to react. But when you're firing at the units in ambush, they can go down, right?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I like it.
Then, yeah, it's a really good rule, but yeah. Matt Castles, for those that haven't played him, he's a very good player. I taught him the basics, and he has schooled me ever since.
It's okay.
And an absolute gentleman as well. Very fun to play against. He will be completely ruthless on the table, but he's extremely friendly, very personable, and I still had an absolute blast getting like slam dunked by him.
Yeah, you would have seen him on our latest stream for the 2v2, which was Gotch and myself versus Dan and Matt. You would also seen him in our first video, which is the 148 tactic demo. He played the Allied side there. But yeah, he's a fantastic player, and you can learn quite a lot from him. Who's he training? Dan, are you training me and Matt's training Gorchin? Is that how it's going to go?
Well, like the problem was I trained Matt so well he didn't need me anymore.
Do it again to Jacob. If you do it right, I won't be able to keep up with Jacob, and then we'll have Jacob and Matt dominating the Perth scene.
It's great. Eventually, someone will train me, and I'll win a game. So I've got that rule book here.
Yep.
And so it's on page 43, retaining orders at the end of the turn. So normally dice are put back in the bag. However, there are 2 exceptions to this. The first one is ambush, where the unit can retain the ambush order as usual. Sorry, instead of putting it in the bag as usual.
Yep.
And then basically they just stay in ambush as normal. Alternatively, at this point, a unit in ambush can attempt to fire. Roll a d6. On a 4+, the unit can fire normally, and then you put the order dice back, the ambush dice is put back into the opportunity to fire or whatever it is that caused them to be distracted. Now, what that means is because there's no ordering of actions in that space, you dropping into ambush in the example that we were previously talking about against someone in ambush, at the end of the turn, both you roll off. If you both roll a 4+, you both shoot each other simultaneously. And so that's a way to, another way of getting rid of ambush is to simply, you go into ambush yourself and then you basically turkey shoot each other. Whoever can roll that 4+, is going to get a shot, and whoever doesn't can't.
Yeah, right.
There is, of course, wouldn't be stuff that I've written if there were just a couple of solutions. You also need to look at, is it worth to move the unit? Like, absolutely, is it worth to move the unit? And if so, how do I want to move? Can I put more terrain between me and the firer? Am I going to be able to withdraw without being seen? Do I actually have to move? Can I hold off? Is it early enough in the game that I'm actually able to do a different order or sit where I am, and I can just wait till next turn to see if they want to risk holding the ambush? Because of course, the more units that hold an ambush order over the turn, the less dice they have to activate in the next turn. So against Matt's finish list, for example, he can come unstuck if he holds all his dice in account in ambush for the next turn, waiting, and then all of a sudden you draw out your 3 HE templates, being a howitzer tank, a mortar, and a light howitzer, for example. You draw out all 3 of those. They don't care whether you're going to go down in terms of the hit ratio. They're just going to indirect fire and go for the 5s potentially, or 6s. If any of those hit, straight away that ambush order is coming off because they're going to go down. And that frees up the rest of your force. But none of those dice are in the bag to actually counteract now your entire move. You're able to do whatever you want again.
There are some strengths to that as well. I mean, in that situation where we're talking about Gorchin's list with a few HEs, which I quite like, I'm going to start utilizing some more of that stuff because I've kind of ignored it, to be honest. I've picked the things that look cool and thematic and want lots of troops, but I want to add more HE into it. But there is a strength to forcing the opponent to make more actions while you've got these reactive units out on the field as well. It really depends on the scenario and what things you can activate. But there's countless times where there's been these important arcs of fire that are covered by ambush that I'm stuck, and I'm like, how do I proceed?
Yeah, look, it's I would recommend in most generic list builds, most, not all, at least 2 to 3 templates of HE of any variety are beneficial, or at least the ability to potentially use HE. So most of Perth, I love my Soviets. They're a bit of a workhorse that I put them through a lot of different things. My favorite list combination is a medium mortar, a ZiS-3 divisional gun, and an Su-76 tank destroyer, self-propelled gun technically. The self-propelled gun, I can pay to give armor-piercing rounds, so it becomes a medium anti-tank gun and a light howitzer. The ZiS-3 divisional gun comes with anti-tank rounds, so it's a light howitzer and a medium anti-tank gun. And then the medium mortar is then another 2-inch HE marker. So across the entire army, before artillery observers, before any of the other flamer goodies and other stuff that I put in, there's 3 2-inch templates. And most people go, 2-inch template isn't that bad. The second part of that plan is to put all 3 of them in the same space. Sort of in the same sort of 12-inch, 18-inch box. And And so you've got multiple units in the same area of the board that are wanting to move, that are wanting to get out of the way, that are wanting to not get hit by a howitzer shell. And that means that at any given point in time, really, when I'm playing hard with my Soviets, I can force an entire flank to either sit there and bunker down, or consider repositioning, and then I just sweep that flank with my own stuff.
Very nice.
Anyway, that was a bit of a tangent on HE, which is a different topic. But
sorry,
what
it's
else
all
have I got
stuff.
Here? Well, I'm at. I've almost got the last portion left to do. I'm at 54 pages, but I haven't actually.
That's a lot for ambush, isn't it?
Yet, so okay, it's not just ambush. Although it does link with quite a bit of stuff. Okay, where are we? Got a couple more things here. Other ways of avoiding ambush, because everyone knows how to set ambushes. That's probably the easy part, but it's how do you react to them, like Jacob was saying. So you can redirect them, and that literally means sending something else to eat the ambush instead. So this is different to the supporting unit retreat that I was talking about earlier. This is actually the reverse of that, and deliberately sending that unit forward instead of backwards of the ambush. So a really good example is, let's say we have a 10-man rifle squad with a light machine gun, a German squad, in a building, and you have a flamethrower within 6 inches and a squad of 10 riflemen, light machine gun within 6 inches. You want that flamethrower to get in, and the German squad's on ambush. You want that flamethrower to get in there and set the building on fire. It's what they do best, right? They go in, they cook stuff. It's great. Everyone has a barbecue. Soviet player's really happy. The German player's really upset. Tell them to get over it. You could, because you want that flamer to go off, they're obviously on ambush because they know the flamer's there. They want to kill that flamer. You could, at 6 inches, decide to go, well, I want to try and pull that unit off ambush. I want to try and get that unit to what's worth more to me. Well, I really want that flamethrower to go in and finish them off. Let's move that 10-man rifle squad that I've got with the light machine gun. Let's move that forward to 3 inches, and let's go for the regular shooting attack. Now, a lot of players are going to look at that and go, I'm protected in a building, so he's 5s to hit. He's point blank, which is going to ignore the movement. So he's 5s to hit. And that's when they're going to start thinking, oh, that's actually, that's like 20 shots on 5s, and everything I get is at least a pin marker. That's going to make it harder to hit that flamer team because they're a small team. Now, flamer team doesn't even have to move if it doesn't want to, but it probably will to get to the point blank and the 3-inch range, because it makes it the hit modifier better. Even me in that scenario, I don't know if I would deliberately take 5s to hit from 20 shots just to kill a flamer team. I think I'd rather go down and force 7s and risk that the flamer team won't kill me, or hope that I get another dice to deal with the flamer team another way. But that's a very different way of swapping up the ambush, because you put the pressure point blank onto the opponent and go, I'm going to make you choose whether I deal damage to your unit in that building now and then clean up with a flamer, or whether you risk that I completely whiff all the attack rolls, which, let's face it, if you're versing me, that's your choice. That's what you take. And then the flamer goes and gets ambushed. But that's actually, especially depending on where the objectives are on the board, what turn of the game is it? Does the German have any supporting units nearby to help deal with that flamer? All those things start coming into account. And so it's a very generic sort of rule of thumb in ways to deal with it, but it's actually quite effective if you're in that circumstance. And a lot of my tactic stuff, just like a lot of what would be considered good tactics, is actually it's a range of tools in your toolkit to use. It's not just simply beating something with a sledgehammer. You know, it does require a little bit of finesse, but you will have the right tool at the right time to unlock whatever your opponent is doing. And if you don't have any other option at all, and so you've got no supporting units around, let's say you've got a couple of pins on your unit, and you're really like, nah, this is just going to go bad, just go down. Don't even bother moving. Don't give them the opportunity to trigger the ambush. Just go down, and you know, you're going to end up with a couple of pins off your unit. You're harder to hit. Yes, it means that your opponent might be in an ambush next turn, but again, that's a dice out of the bag that they're not doing anything with.
Would you ever counter an ambush with an ambush and then try and see if they now know that might be a waste?
50-50?
No, but you're immediately making that initial ambush position not important anymore, because it's like, okay, well, now he's taking the ambush. Maybe he's not actually going to move forward.
Yes. I thought I'd when I was talking about the end of turn ambushing, I thought I covered off here. So yeah, I absolutely, if instead of going down, like, so the trick with the ambush is you have to be able to pass an order test. So if you have a couple of pins on you already, and you can't risk that unit not performing an order, you can go down, which is free. You don't drop any pins, but you go straight down. That's going to impact his ambush anyway. But if you didn't have any pins, or you only had one pin, absolutely going into ambush is what I'd recommend, because you can go into ambush, and if he goes to shoot at you, you can drop down. Or as we checked in the rule book, you can both wait till the end of turn and go for the 50-50 draw, and just shoot him back. But I mean,
interestingly, on that draw sort of mechanic, would they still have the opportunity to convert it into a down?
Because it's done simultaneously, from a TO point of view, I would rule not, because you either, with that flexibility, you would have to deliberately hold them over with an ambush to the next turn without attempting to fire. So my understanding of the ruling is that as soon as everyone who wants to fire attempts to fire, you're all either dice coming off and you've wasted your action, or wasted the action for the turn, or you're flipping to the fire order to take a shot, and then your dice is going back in the bag. So I mean, house rule however you want. I probably wouldn't support going back to down if you rolled the dice to try and take a shot.
This has been great, Dan. I mean, there's a lot to think about in ambush, and it's a mechanic I just rarely use. I mean, there are immediate takeaways in this that are easy, which is, number one, you can just do sniper first turn ambush, because then you can wait for them to pop into the open that it makes sense for you to use that fire order. Then there's, considerations on making opponents make decisions when you are in an ambush, and you are locking down sectors of the board. It's a really strong ability just for one activation that otherwise could have just been, firing on sixes.
Yeah, that's right. And when you look at, as Gorcham was talking about with the the dual ambushing units, it's actually an order that gets exponentially stronger the more supporting ambushing units you have nearby, which is why the Finns generally work so well. Is because you have the option to either double up your ambushes on someone moving and pour twice the amount of shots into them, or you can just do one at a time and spread pins across the entire opponent battle line.
Brilliant.
So that's a drop in the water.
That's a Dan quick review at Ambush, eh? So you
Quick, took like an hour.
Just to fill people in on the podcast, we talked about it in episode 1, but Dan has been working on a player's handbook on bolt action and all of the interactions on decision making and becoming a better player and things to take into account. And it's, correct me if I'm wrong, it's kind of measured in different cycles of here's what you need for the beginner and the medium and sort of the expert on a variety of different topics. And you've been editing this for several years, and the idea was that we would slowly integrate some of these topics into the podcast, and then we'll create some actual video content specifically around some of those interactions and go from there. But it's kind of Dan's bolt action life work at the moment, and hearing any little bits of it is really exciting.
Yeah, it's sort of taking a bit of a life of its own just in the document, and so this format of where I'm actually discussing fielding questions, obviously anyone that has a comment that wants to throw in or add their opinion or contact me or Jacob or Gorchin, please do. Like, I don't want this specifically to be purely my viewpoint. That is where it originates from. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, working things out on the table, obviously playing and the experience of it. I've got anyone that's following the Rockingham historical gamers can actually see my journey in strategy war games over the last sort of 10 days. I'm doing one of those challenges on the Facebook page, and that explains sort of how and why I think like I do with some of this stuff. But the intent is to make someone who doesn't feel that they can play better. And it's not because what they're doing is wrong. They just simply don't have the knowledge base that some of us other gamers do. I'm trying to speed that learning process up by documenting some of how that all works to make it a bit easier, so that we can have more gamers like Matt Castles, for example, who now is showing other people how to play. So it's working great for our Perth scene, but I'd really be quite comfortable to go, make of it what you will. This is working for us, but here is a player guide. Here is some things to think about when you want to become a better player.
It's definitely really exciting. Can't wait to hear more about it. I'm sure we can expand on it on the episodes and eventually get those documents published one day. It's really cool, and like it's sort of in a strange point for us in the sense that our club is super casual, and we've enjoyed playing games for fun, and I'm not suggesting that learning more about the game doesn't make it more fun, and really thinking about it a bit more. But there's two different mindsets on playing. Are you playing competitively? Are you playing at a bit more of a relaxed level? And I'm comfortable to make those decisions on what is appropriate based on the opponent there and then. So it's exciting for me because I'm the newest guy on the block for wargaming out of all of us. And I've been just playing it casually for fun and taking an interest in it, but I consciously want to get better, and I don't have the experience to do that on my own. And there are concepts and things that you think about that I don't naturally think about. And that may just come from the different background that I have. But any bits of information, any chats that I have with Dan post game, pre game, it's always exciting, and there's a little bit extra that you end up thinking about on playing games in general, and it doesn't necessarily focus just on bolt action either. There's a lot of mechanics. There's a lot of just game theory and things that could be applicable to other systems as well. So, you know, sure, Dan's going to talk about the specifics of bolt action and the sort of decisions around that, but you'll be able to make some judgments from there on where this could be applicable elsewhere. So
yeah, definitely. There's a bit of coverage on some real basic hit percentages, talking about deployment in war games, maneuvering. Particular units often have certain roles, certain purposes, and that sort of stems across definitely into things like Age of Sigmar, Warhammer 40,000. Those units generally have a very specific role. They might generally all have a cool gun of some description that does cool things, but innately within those rules designs, they excel at doing certain types of things. It's always been that way, and most war games, because it comes from history, right? You go back to even ancient history with the different weapon types, the different armor types, your different strategies to try and attack. Alexander the Great breaking the Greek phalanxes, like it was all different ways of applying different tools. It's exactly the same on the board. That's really all it is.
And I think Jacob, you're not you're sort of selling yourself short a little bit here. I know you've played a fair bit of Company Heroes. I know you like other strategy games.
Yeah.
If you think about Company Heroes, each one of those units has an individual purpose. If you're playing Axis very quickly, Volk's Grenadier squads are nice and cheap. You can get them real quick, but it's a very fast. It's a very early point in the game. You can get a 5-man squad with SMGs in close combat. That's absurd in Company of Heroes. The sort of thinking about my opponent is fielding this, I need to bring this out. That's the same sort of mentality you need to have during list building, but you have to have a more general sort of idea. What are the likely things that I'm going to look at? And you were actually quite lucky in bolt action that a generic reinforced platoon looks quite similar from most nations.
Yeah.
You'd expect a tank, you'd expect an armored car, you'd expect some infantry. So make sure you have a tool in your toolkit that you bring with you that you can solve each one of those different problems. Now, the challenging part, of course, is you are limited with, at any given game, you're limited to the tools that you've brought. Now, an adjustable wrench doesn't make a perfectly fitted socket spanner, and it never will. But if it's all you've got, you just got to get on that nut and you've just got to turn it. There's no other two ways about it. But it's about making the most out of what you've got. That's where the challenge is in a lot of these sort of war games, is because you can't just go to your barracks, build another unit to counter the AT guns or something like that. It's like, and one of the things that I certainly struggle with a lot in wargaming is like, if you can't solve that problem, stop trying to solve that one. Make a new problem for your opponent. There have been a lot of cases where I've gone, I can't deal with that tank. I'm just going to keep trying, or I'm just going to keep trying to get rid of that squad in cover. Just ignore it. If they're going to sit in cover and do their thing over there, just circumvent them completely. So you have to outmaneuver their advantage somehow. Now, of course, that's all easier said than done, but it's just some things to think about. Is that you might do the same thing in an RTS, rather than coming across and trying to take on an enemy's late game super heavy. You might actually just outmaneuver it and just go, it can do its own thing over there, and I'm just going to completely ignore it.
My benefit in video games is always trying to outdo on reaction time, and that's just something that I can not bank on at all in wargaming, because it is turn-based. So it is new to me, whereas before it's just like, okay, I can get faster at this than anybody that I can face, so that will get me over this hurdle.
So that actually sounds like, when you say it like that, it's like, reaction times in wargaming. You've actually touched on something very interesting. There was a fighter pilot called Lieutenant John Boyd. He is the embodiment of, you can either be someone or you can do something. And rather than accepting fame, he decided to completely reinvent dogfighting and fighter jets. So he has this concept called an OODA loop, which is now not unique to him, and it's actually been used everywhere. But it's observe, orient, decide, act, and it's this decision-making process that everybody goes through. You see something, you orientate, you observe it, you orientate your thinking to that problem, you decide how you're going to solve the problem, and then you execute your action. Now, in wargaming, of course, you're afforded luxury because you typically only have to, especially in boltaction, you only have to do that once every order dice. Now, the advantage of reaction time is a byproduct of being able to cycle through your OODA loop very quickly. So one of the things that you should try to do is, rather than thinking about only the action step, try to observe lots of different things, try to orient lots of different things, and try to make lots of different decisions. Now, one of the best ways to defeat your opponent in a dogfight, Boyd came up with, was you interrupt his OODA loop. The best thing you can do is, once he's observed something and oriented it, you force him to go back to observation, because then he hasn't made a decision. And even if he wanted to act, he can't. He's paralyzed. And so you can, of course, that happens slower in a war game, but use the reaction time, use that mentality of, I've got to do these things, I've got to do them really quickly. Use that to come up with a dozen different strategies before they've even finished moving that squad. Because sometimes, I know for me, the first idea that I come up with is never the best one. And so far, it hasn't been the 14,000th idea that I've come up with. If I've come up with the best idea, I will let you know. It hasn't happened yet. But the thing is, generally speaking, they're better. Or every now and again, I will have five or six ideas that are the same, and I'll go, nope, I haven't changed my observation. I'm still oriented on the same thing. Okay, that's the only decision I can do there. I need to think about something different and try to come up with a different plan. And this is that's sort of an embodiment of what we were talking about earlier, about just rolling a Sherman on to deal with a sniper team. That is an orientation I never had.
Yeah.
Because I've observed the sniper team, I've oriented, okay, I need to deal with that threat. I'm going to deal with it by something that can't be threatened by a sniper. But I was so locked into this, tanks are oriented to dealing with other tanks, that I couldn't break that framework, that groove. And so you can play this game with your opponent where you force them to make multiple observations as much as you can. And if you ever find yourself looking at the table, holding onto an order dice, going, that's you stuck in an OODA loop, right? And so that's, ideally, you never want to be there, and you want to force your opponent to be there, which is why I have a really uncomfortable and weird grin on my face when I see my opponent doing that. It's like, got you.
Yeah, and it seems to happen with me more often with stronger opponents as well. Like it is not just an inaction from my ability to read what's happening. It happens more frequently if I verse Dan or Matt, and in particular if I verse any of the mundane knights.
So a capable opponent will either be doing that consciously because they're trying to interrupt your OODA loop, or they're doing that unconsciously. They don't realize that it is what they're doing, but that is exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, it's all. I mean, I 100% agree with you, Gorchin. Like, when I'm playing with a bit more of a competitive edge, because I do, for a lot of the games where I want to play to have fun, I dial it right back. Like, I just play to have fun. But definitely when I'm in that competitive headspace, I don't count the OODA loops because I'd lose count, but I'm constantly reassessing things every physical model that's moved can essentially,
got a bit of a technical
depending on where it is on the board, it'll influence my decision making, and I have to quickly, rapidly bounce backwards and forwards. Have I got you?
Yeah, we kind of got you a bit.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's I was just saying that I had to learn how to do that OODA loop stuff quicker to play 40k tournaments.
Yeah. That's actually one of those things where I go, you go, is actually a lot more overwhelming, because you're not forced into hitting your decide and act. The game, if you're not sort of experienced at the design of the game, and the I go, you go system actually interrupts your OODA loop all the time.
Yeah.
And so that's why a lot of people find those games overwhelming, is because they're trying to take in so much information and then distill all of this information into one decision and one action, which in an I go, you go game is actually also not what you're doing, because of course you're moving your whole army. So it's not one decision and one action, it's several. And typically, my experience has been playing against very strong 40k players. I'm not really one of them. I'll happily admit that. I've only done tournaments sort of casually. Having come across some of those guys, they've baked in a second OODA loop into their current OODA loop. It's absurd. Like they're going, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and if that doesn't work out, I already know what my next 4 OODA loops are, because I've already done them of each one of those outcomes, which is probably a chess thing, right? It's a rote learning, the opening moves and that sort of thing. But yeah, try to use that reaction time rather than sort of writing it off and saying it has no place. Try to, again, this is your strength, this is your background, this is something that you've done heaps. Just try to find a way to apply it, because when when that Carthaginian crossed the Alps, he wasn't relying on stuff that he didn't know. He was relying on stuff that he'd done hundreds of times before, and it's the same everywhere else. And when Fabian was doing it to him, later on the seasons to follow, it's the same shit. They're relying on stuff that they know and getting it to work for them. And you'll see that a lot. You'll come across players who are doing stuff you've never thought of. Dan coming up with, there's a 6 face on the die, guys, please remember to use it, and that stuff blows my mind. But these are things that are inherent to everybody, is that you will have these differences, and don't write off strengths in other areas. Just find a way to apply them instead. And just like you build a list in your army as a toolkit to bring to the table, try to figure out the tools that you have in your toolkit, in terms of the way that you think about things and your other experiences, and find the things that you can apply in bolt action, or wargaming in general. I suspect that there are actually quite a lot of people out there who undermine and underhand their own strategic and tactical thinking because they think it's not relevant.
Yep, 100%.
Cycling back to the start of this podcast where we talked a lot about Tabletop Simulator, I think that's probably a good space to sort of put a lot of these things into practice, because there's a good part of this hobby that's the hobby side of it, and you are buying the cool models that you like from history to paint up, and not necessarily there are 2 different players. There are players that will read the rule book straight away and then decide how to build their army based on the combinations that they can see in there. And then there's the other players like me who go, I want to have these things because I've read about them or seen them in a movie or something like this. And I go ahead and buy the things that I'm going to enjoy to paint. And then I think about later, through experience of matches, what I'm going to need to actually fill the gaps that are missing. And I think that that can get expensive doing it that way. It's more fun. You get to paint what you like. But I think with that immediate access to every model that's possible in Tabletop Simulator, you can kind of make those combinations work for you before you're committing to painting the models and spending the time on them. So I think that might be my kind of go-to before building and buying too much that I just like the look of. Didn't help me with my latest army. I still bought an infantry box of paras and a tank destroyer, but like I kind of needed both of those anyway. I haven't decided on what other options I need. Like I don't know what mortars I'm going to need, what artillery pieces I'm going to need. I haven't even read the US books, knowing.
You got an HQ though, right, Jacob?
I got plastic infantry model out of the plastic box that can behave like an HQ. I got one pointing. I got one pointing with up, and I got one pointing with a Thompson. I can adjust them. I've tucked in as many bars as the plastic kit has, so I haven't actually put in mind what the infantry squads should look like. I've literally taken them out of the box and chucked in the weapon options. I think I've really reduced on the Thompsons because I know I've had a lot of German kits where I put in a lot of SMGs and always find that they're out of range. So this one I was like, all right, I'm going to put a lot of riflemen in. That's just how I'm going to build them up. But I didn't go in there with a list in mind. I'm like, these are the 30 paras I want right now. I'm going to paint these up. I'm going to figure out how I want to paint these as well. And then I'll actually look at expanding the lists and buying stuff as I can afford it. But yeah, like I don't look at something and go, I need to spend this $200 in this configuration to get this list. That doesn't do it for me. I buy the pretty models I want at that time and I paint what I want. But I don't know. It might actually change my mindset on creating lists to do them digitally first, especially now because there's no way to play physically anyway.
You can come to my house just when no one's here.
And not tell the government.
Yeah, well, I think it's important probably to recognize, Jacob, that everyone's hobbyist journey in any of these hobbies is unique, and you're not doing it wrong.
Yeah.
I want to be very clear about that. Same with anyone that's listening or watching along with us. Your hobby journey is not wrong. Everyone goes through different stages of what they're doing. I started out, I've never been in a place of I'm going to purchase miniatures that I want to paint. I actually really struggle to get stuff painted. My primary focus was building models, love building models, and playing games, love playing games. Innately, that led to I'm going to design lists that I want in games that are fun to play, not overly broken, and then I'm going to fulfill those lists. The one that I'm working on at the moment, which I think I've got down pat from all the reading and testing I did, is the Bulgarian Winter Force. That's a really hard force to play, really hard. They don't have many tools. They don't have many weapon options. They don't have many national characteristics. And the national characteristics that they do have, I'm essentially only using one of them, which is for the Panzer III. But that's done from a gaming point of view because that's where I go. I would love to be at a point of actually doing stuff for the sake of just wanting to paint it, but that's not me. It's just not how it goes. I love and respect the fact that you can do that, and I've seen you paint more armies since the time that I've known you than I own.
Yeah,
these guys know what my garage looks like.
my problem is these beautiful campaigns that we keep designing and the different theaters that Nick builds a board for. So as soon as he said he's building a winter force, I'm like, well, what are you doing? Oh, I'm doing Germans. All right, well, you're going to need paras to fight that. So all right, I'll buy some paras. And then now Gorchin's doing varsity. So I've lost my summer Germans, I guess. I ended up selling them on to support I don't know, probably more DAC than I needed at the time. I don't know, but
look, Jacob, we're talking March 45. You don't need men in uniforms. You need old men and children and plastic guns, and then that pretty much represents the German forces of March 1945.
Maybe a broomstick.
I just don't think the yellow uniforms are gonna work though. It's probably the only thing that wasn't there. And yeah, no, and I've doubled down on Nick's one, so I've made them all winter themed because I wanted to learn how to do winter theming for 148 Tactic. I was like, oh yeah, the
Yep.
bold action models
So,
are more my thing. I can learn on that. I'm like, okay, now these look really good, so I'm gonna chuck more snow on them. Now they won't be appropriate for Gorchin's board.
No, it's clear. There's a clear hierarchy of boards, and I'm not at the top. I see how that is.
it's okay, Gorchin. You wait for it long enough, and you have what happened where I eventually got to my terrain and actually started doing it up nice, and the foam core ruins now look like Italian Mediterranean ruins, and it brings you up a level, and Jacob will start looking at your board a bit differently.
I do really like
One
your
day.
board, and I'm not actually. This is not like this is not conscious. I just saw that winter stuff, and I've never painted winter, and I was like, yeah, I want it. It's not that you're.
Look, I see how it is. It's fine. You don't have to lie to my face, Jacob.
Oh.
On TV.
Yep, that's true. But yeah, on your varsity thing, I still don't know what I want to do. I mean, the easy option is just to chuck the winter troops in there and just deal with it. But I'm like, do I go German? Do I go?
Why not?
Yeah, I don't know. So run me through it very quickly. What forces are there?
So it's been a while since I've actually looked at the narrative notes for varsity. I've just been like deep in this terrain stuff. But off the top of my head, I know you've got American and British paratroopers.
Mm-hmm.
They were sort of the paratrooper force. As far as I remember, I don't think there was Canadians. The Canadian Corps wasn't present, but again, take that with a pinch of salt. The American and the British also had an armor mechanized force actually crossing the Rhine itself. The Allied Air Force was there in all of its late war glory. The Luftwaffe was actually still quite present. Lots of as many Focke-Wulf 190s as they could really field, but it was still some late model 109s. Interestingly, you actually saw a lot of Luftwaffe support personnel, basically not frontline combat pilots and not the people they needed to keep them flying because the Air Force is getting smaller. A lot of them actually were in combat units as well. There was some elements of Panzer Division was there. So Panzer Grenadiers actually fell under Panzer Division. You didn't get a Panzer Grenadier unit. They were attached to, they were sort of an infantry, I think it was a battalion attached to a Panzer Division. But yeah, so they were there, but they were in this weird space where they had more materiel than they did men. Not ammo, but they had, because when the men would get up and flee from these positions and then the units would retreat, they'd leave all their anti-tank and all their machine guns behind, and so all of these like leftover units would just pick them all up. So it almost got to the point where they had like one anti-tank gun per squad. Which is absurd, absolutely absurd. They never actually fielded them in that sort of manner because you don't need squads manning anti-tank guns, you need them doing squad stuff. But at that point of the war, you're also talking a lot of Volkssturm, which is it's not official Wehrmacht soldiers, they're political paramilitary organizations. And then you got Volksgrenadiers, which was the attempt to make Volkssturm have clout and influence, which were, again, a sort of Nazi party soldiers, quote unquote. But they were given sort of slightly better equipment and stuff. And
so Volksgren, very quickly, are they they're not under the influence of the army at all?
So SS troops, it's not quite varies, but it depends on how much that particular political person liked that particular field commander. And so Volkssturm and Volksgrenadiers were technically political. They had their own hierarchy, their own organization, their own ranks. And same like all of the SS divisions as well. They were under direct answer to the Nazi Party, not the Wehrmacht, and they had their own supply chains and purchasing and stuff, which is why you see like weird variants of tanks and stuff in SS Panzer divisions and that sort of thing. Just because the Nazi and the party and Hitler was just like, oh man, I really want this real cool big shiny tank. And the Volkssturm and the Volksgrenadier had not just like inferior equipment by standard. Some of it was inferior, some of it was better, but they also actually had inferior designs as well. They were these.
They got their own bizarre assault rifle, don't they?
It's not quite an assault rifle, but yeah, they came up and like honestly, when you look at them up close, and Forgotten Weapons did a great video on the VG1-5, which is the Volkssturm like rifle. It's like, man, I have seen Nerf guns that I would take into combat over that thing. It's just, but yeah, and so you had Panzer divisions, you had Panzer Grenadiers, Volkssturm, Volksgrenadiers, Luftwaffe as acting as soldiers. You had Kriegsmarine, so the Navy acting as soldiers as well. So pretty much every German man and his dog who was willing to fight at the time was there. There was also, I'm not sure if they quite made it into varsity, but later on, probably in Berlin, they were there. There was effectively what was like political militia forces as well. You were you were given a military position and a ranking of how quickly you should respond to Allied forces in your street in Berlin, depending on what your day job was. So if you were a school teacher, you were supposed to respond really quickly because it didn't matter if you were at school when their allies were in your streets. But if you were a doctor, you weren't supposed to respond to the call for militia because, yeah, it was actually quite interesting, quite complex. I think Military History Visualized did a really good video on that one. The names escape me. If we remember by the time we publish, we'll throw it in there, link or something in the description. But yeah, it's real fascinating. Depending on what your day job was, depending on whether or not you should be fighting or keeping at your day job, which from a state of emergency, a state of war emergency, makes a lot of sense. I could definitely see any country doing that, not just Nazi Germany, for example.
And you're talking about Luftwaffe there. Would you see Fallschirmjäger that didn't paratroop in?
So the Fallschirmjäger regiments at the time, basically after Crete, you got this really weird thing where some of the Fallschirmjäger regiments as were veterans and they retained their elite veterancy status, both in equipment and training and capability. And then there was these other these other Fallschirmjäger regiments that were just
in name,
effectively in name. Yeah, they weren't. Yeah. They didn't have any additional training. They weren't any different from regular soldiers. In fact, most of them weren't even combat veterans. And by mid to late war for Germany, that's exceedingly rare for you to have somebody who's not seen combat, because even early in the war, the Wehrmacht was an elite and veteran fighting force by the time they came to the Eastern Front, and by the time they invaded Poland, thanks to the Spanish Civil War and some other influences that they were involved in Europe. So yeah, to see Fallschirmjäger regiments made up of completely green and inexperienced soldiers that were under-equipped was quite absurd for a lot of people, which is a bit of a tangent here, but it's why you see some after-action reports of Allied forces against Fallschirmjägers like differ wildly in the capability of Fallschirmjäger units. Like the ones holding Carentan were genuine tough as nails veterans, and then the ones that they encountered on the outskirts of Carentan as they beat them back was the green reinforcements, and they just walked all over them.
Yeah.
But they didn't know any better, right? They've got Fallschirmjäger uniforms, they've got the equipment and stuff like that. And so, but by the time you get to March 1945, most of those units are, they're not really combat effective anymore. Even if they are experienced, they're weary and all of their equipment's shut to shit. But they've got more rifles than they've got ammo, and that's the important part, I guess.
And this is reflective in the bolt action theater lists towards 44, 45 that you actually get to be able to field FJs in regular and inexperienced as well, and green,
Yeah.
and a lot of the
Okay.
different units. I think only the late war SS only go as low as regulars for some bizarre reason, unless you're going Hitler Youth or something like this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean there are a lot of inexperienced slash regular options for Germans that you don't necessarily see in the other books. When you look at late war, should be interesting to have a look at. A Volkssturm Force might be interesting. It's going to play terribly for sure, but I don't know. Are there any interesting options for them, Dan? Do they get like an absurd amount of Panzerfaust or something strange?
They actually did. So I had a Josh Cello for a little while was testing a Volkssturm list, which was designed around those squads.
Yeah.
They get quite a bit of kit. They do get quite a bit of kit. If it's the same squad that I'm thinking of, they start off as green, and they potentially, the ones he was using, that is, start off as green. And then when they took their first casualty, like a green test, they would actually potentially bounce to regular. And if they took a casualty when they were regular, they could bounce to being veteran, I think it was, in 2 separate roles.
Wow.
That made some of the units that got that double succession quite painful to deal with, because you've got the numbers of what is largely a regular inexperienced list suddenly bolstered by veterans. But most of them didn't make it to regular, which is the catch. So it made the list, which focused on those core sorts of units, quite unreliable, because you could commit 2 units even onto one flank and go, you need to hold objective A. One would stay as inexperienced, one might bump to regular, but it doesn't bump to veteran, but you're versing 2 regular forces. So if it's the same sort of combo I'm thinking of, it's fun to play because there's an element of unpredictability to it. But it actually, depending on how you design that list, it became challenging to play for exactly the same reason.
Yeah, definitely. Just closing up, how close are you to finishing that board, Gorch? And I'll sneak a little bit of video in at the end of this when you got something to share.
So I'm actually pretty close. I almost finished them on the Easter weekend, but that was about 4 days of me just running dry on 6 or 7 different materials. So I've got the whole board for the whole narrative setting is 4 3x4s. So you'll end up with basically 2 6x4 games to play, and the 4 sort of tiles are going to be interchangeable. So I figured once we're out of our entrenched positions, we can just leave them at the club and have people use them freely. I need to basically pluck up a couple of more trees, base some 2 tiles, and then I'm pretty much done.
Nice.
They are playable at that point. The only thing that's left is I'm going to do some just some like small detail work, things like getting some denser clumps for to scatter about the grass for some brushes and things like that. That sort of thing, once I've got them together, is going to be throw them down, glue them on, done. So it's going to be not even a half-hour bit of work. But yeah, I think I ran out of grass. I ran out of the type of glue that I was using. I ran out of the thinner. My spray bottle got clogged. I ran out of the clump for the tree foliage. I ran out of the varnish. It was just like, and all of this stuff was at least half full when I started on the Friday, and I was like, it'll be fine. And then every time I ran out of something, I was like, oh, that's fine. I'll finish this other thing that I don't need that for. And then that happened. An infinite number of times. So, but I've got 2 4x3s done, so you can stick them together to get a 6x4, and you're good to go. So yeah, we'll have some footage of that coming shortly, I think.
Yeah, no, that'd be really cool. I mean, sorry to keep going on about it, but it's like the one exciting hobby thing that's going to be happening as soon as this whole COVID thing is
As soon
over.
as it's over.
Yeah.
As soon as it's over.
Yeah, so definitely want to get straight into that event as soon as ASAP when, the world is well again. So super excited for that. I think we should probably call it for our first not live stream, but Zoom
Well, sort of a
meeting
live stream.
for the historical miniature gamers. Unless there's anything that we clearly need to discuss right now that I have missed.
No, I don't think so. I think it's all of these tactics, bits and pieces that I'm working through. Like we were just talking about the ambush order essentially for an hour. So I certainly don't want to flood the channel and the content with that sort of stuff all the time, because it will just drive people insane. But I certainly think that we've covered it well enough, and a lot of extra stuff in addition this session. I think it's been good. And yeah, I think we're good.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we'll sign out because I think Gorchin just lost battery on his mobile phone or anything like that. But good to catch up with you. It's better than just chatting online through text and stuff.
Yeah.
So that was really cool. And yeah, hopefully we can do some gaming online very soon and stream that to let other people know what we're up to.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Catch you, Dan.
All right, mate. Thanks very much. See you
All
later.
right. See ya.